My name is Simro, I'm a cosplayer. This is my very first cosplay crafting video. I have been cosplaying for a really long time, but this is my first time really finding motivation to record the process of my crafting. I'm very heavily inspired by other cosplayers like Jessica Nigri and Kamui Cosplay and Composite Cosplay. Seriously, I worship them. Their videos are incredible. Mine, though, probably won't be as professional. I still hope that you find some enjoyment from this and maybe you learn something too. The cosplay I'm crafting is a redesigned version of Dark Magician Girl from Yu-Gi-Oh! I grew up watching this show on 4Kids back in the day. If you remember that, you're old. Dark Magician Girl has always been my favorite monster. However, her outfit isn't very flattering on me, and I think it's kind of outdated, so I wanted to update it and redesign it. For this, I contacted an incredible artist named Made Out of Foam, who is also a fellow cosplayer. I sent them reference images of my body type, also character design elements that I really like, and they came back to me with this perfect design. Seriously, I love it. It has everything I asked for. And now that I have my reference, I can start crafting. Let's go!
First things first, I need a pattern. I used this bodysuit from a One Punch Man Saitama cosplay that already fit me, and I traced it onto paper. I cut the folded part in half to make sure it was symmetrical, and I don't want one titty just popping out of there. Or do you? Then I traced it again onto another sheet of paper so I could sketch out the pattern of the pink lines that appear on the bodysuit. And then I cut those out to get my little pink line pattern pieces. Now I finally get to move on to fabric. I got this shiny sparkly blue and pink fabric from the LA Fabric District downtown. You can't tell they're shiny right now because they're drawing on the wrong side of the fabric, but they are. And then I cut the pieces out while making sure to leave seam allowance and making sure to cut out the back piece too. Do you like the random weights that I used for my pattern because I was too lazy to pin it down? And then this paper that I'm spreading out is actually heat and bond for stretchy fabrics. I'm making sure I get it in pieces big enough for the pink stripes that will be adhered to this heat and bond. And I use the heat and bond pieces to then put onto the pink fabric and make sure that's the right size and shape for the stripes. Seriously, this stuff is straight up fucking magical. It changed my cosplay life. It just irons on and then attaches right to your fabric, and it stays stretchy and you don't have to sew it. Don't judge me for not having an ironing board though. I just use my bed, it works fine, and I only burned a hole in it once. And then the heat and bond is attached to the wrong size of the pink fabric, and I trace the stripe pattern out and carefully cut it. I also very carefully lay out the pieces where they lie in the bodysuit to make sure it's symmetrical. I'm just trying to make sure it matches the reference image. I forgot to film the ironing part, but it just gets ironed down the same way it got ironed on the first time, and then it sticks. And it's straight up magic. Look at this. It's just on there. And it's still stretchy, and it doesn't come off. It's fully bonded. I love this shit. Now the front and back pieces of the bodysuit are ready to be sewn together. They get clipped and run through my sewing machine with a zigzag stitch so I can stretch it over my giant butt. And I also fold and pin the raw edges to hem it up and make it look a little cleaner. I probably should have sewn a lining onto this, but I didn't. Oh well. Next, I'm moving on to the fingerless gloves that Dark Magician Girl is wearing underneath her armor. This is basically just an arm sock with a thumb hole. I traced my arm onto the fabric, then cut it out to get my pattern, and then traced it again for the second piece. And then after sewing all of this together, yeah, it was too small. It didn't fit. I couldn't even get it all the way onto my hand. I didn't leave a steam allowance, my hands are tiny, and it still didn't fit. So I got to do it all over again. And it fits now! Wow, so proud. Look at that! Oh yeah! There they both are. I did it. Yay! Okay, boot time! Same process as before. I'm making a pattern by tracing my whole ass leg while lying on the floor, and I'm really hoping I don't mess up this time, or else I'll have to make another boot cover, and that's a lot of wasted fabric. I'm also using the I'm using the first boot pattern to trace and make the pink stripes. They'll be ironed onto this with the heat and bond. Can't forget to trace the bottom of the shoe as well. My pattern is laid on top of the fabric while it's folded in half so I can get equal pieces for both sides of the boot. I wasn't too lazy to pin this one down for some reason though. I also have leftover heat and bond with pink fabric for those pink stripes. I didn't do as good of a job making this symmetrical as I did on the bodysuit. Like, I laid them out and tried my best, but when I sewed them together, they ended up being like a centimeter or two off. I just eyeballed it and hoped for the best. And there, it's nice and stretchy and bonded. Then I once again pin it together and sew it down with some nice stretchy zigzag stitch. I then get to turn this bitch inside out and attach the bottom piece of the fabric that goes on the bottom of my foot. This is really hard. It always makes my brain hurt when I do this part and I mess it up twice. But we got there in the end. And despite how much I wing it, this shit fits. Holy shit. I need to take it in a little bit on the ankles, but otherwise it's great. So yeah, I just draw a new little seam and I hem it right there. The boots also have some white thigh-high socks peeking out of them, but instead of wearing boots over actual socks, I'm going to sew them together so I'm not spending the whole day at the convention pulling them up my legs while they keep falling down. And I'm also going to be sewing the boots and the sock combo to a pair of tights so that's super secure all day. You'll probably notice that I didn't include the gold trim that goes on the top of the boot covers that's in the reference photo, and that's because I straight up forgot. I just forgot it was there and I didn't do it. Now I'm hemming the top of the boot cover and getting ready to pin them to the socks so that these two pieces can be sewn together. And I pin them while I'm wearing it, and I gotta be careful not to stab myself during this process. And sew that bitch on. Once the sewing is all done, I get to move on to crafting the armor, which is my favorite part of the build. I'm starting with an easy piece to work my way into it, which is the gauntlets. And to get the pattern of the gauntlets, I'm using the tried and true method of covering my body in saran wrap and duct tape. The duct tape goes on top of the cling wrap so that I can draw the pattern directly onto my body and I don't tape onto my skin or fabric or have trouble taking it off. It's a widely used method used by many cosplayers in order to get a perfect fit on the armor. Be careful cutting out though, okay? I start with a really basic shape of my gauntlet, trace it onto paper, and then I can add the extra details on top and bottom of the piece, like where the elbow is, and that little extra layered piece at the bottom as well. I also trace my hand onto paper to make the small piece of hand armor. Then, with all the patterns finished, I can start tracing them onto 4mm EVA foam. I recommend medium to high density for armor pieces that go on your body. TNT Cosplay Supplies is my favorite place to get basic foam. It's also at Michael's, but it's way overpriced there in my opinion. I make sure to trace the patterns twice, one for the left arm and one for the right arm, and you make sure to flip the pattern for the second piece. Now, each of these armor pieces have this round trim that goes all around the edges, and the best way to get this trim is to buy it pre-made in half-circle foam dowels. Luckily, Joann's Fabrics sells Yayahan line of EVA foam accessories, which includes all sorts of shapes to use for trim. Unluckily, they were sold out of the half circle, so I ordered a bunch of full circle foam dowels and spent a lot of time carefully cutting each one in half. It was a pretty slow process. Most of my cuts were really messy, but nobody's going to see that messy cut since it's getting glued down to the foam anyways. And then adding the trim is just lining up the pieces, cutting the correct length, and gluing it down. I didn't measure any of these, I just eyeballed it and made sure to cut my dowels at an angle so that they glued together in the right direction. The glue that I use for all of my EVA foam armor is called Barge. It's a contact cement. I'll be using it for the entire build. It's super strong but not super fast, so in order to make a really strong bond, I coat each piece that I want to glue together in a very thin layer of Barge, and I do that using a piece of scrap foam. Then I let both sides dry until it's a bit tacky, then I carefully press both pieces together. I cut out all of the drying time in this process video, but for each piece that's glued together with Barge, it's a couple minutes of waiting. I repeat adding the trim to each part of the gauntlet and also make sure to heat up the EVA foam with my heat gun. This helps close all of those pores and makes it easier to paint, but also EVA foam can be shaped while it's heated up, so I can roll the gauntlet into a round shape that fits around my arm. Then this extra little layer gets a coat of Barge on the back and a matching coat on the main gauntlet, and it gets attached. I also did a test fit of the gauntlets with some duct tape as my attachments, and they fit great. I'm really happy with them. The last little bits that these gauntlets get are these resin gems, one for each hand and one for each gauntlet, right on top near the elbow. These are also really easy to attach with Barge, but the ones on the gauntlet have some trim around them. And my trim actually leaves pretty big gaps in the top and bottom, right around the edges. And to fill these gaps, I use foam clay, which is super easy to apply with just water. And then it ends up drying within a day or two, and it dries super lightweight. One of the more complicated pieces in any armor build is usually the breastplate. Breast. I'm covering myself in cling wrap again, and this time it's on top of the bodysuit that I already sewed, and this is so I can have a good reference for where everything is supposed to sit. I only have to cover one half of my boobeh in tape because it will be a symmetrical piece, and I can flip it to the other side and it matches the other boobeh. I sketch out the pattern while keeping an eye on my reference piece, and then I cut out and trace this into paper to use it as a base for the foam. I use this sketchy line as a guide for the final pattern. This half circle is going to be the dome of the star, and that's painted on right in the middle of the breastplate, and it's a little half ball. It's one of those little ball pit balls, one of the shitty piss covered ones in Chuck E. Cheese. The booby cup gets cut into two halves so that they can lie flat on paper to make the pattern. They'll become round again once glued together, and the lines drawn as score marks are so that I know how to match up each half when I glue them later. For the breastplate, I'm using 4mm EVA foam, and while tracing the pattern papers onto the foam, I'm also marking L and R onto them, so I know which pieces go together to be the left and right booby cups. Do you remember the Jenna Marbles video, Everything is Glue? That's what I think of every time I glue something. Since EVA foam can be heated up and shaped however you like, I'm throwing these booby cups under a heat gun and then pressing and squeezing them around this giant plastic ball that I've had for a long time. It helps give some of that roundness back into the shape and perfectly grasp my big ol' titties. And now I'm using Barge again to attach the cups to the underwire bra thing, bottom piece of the breastplate, the part that goes around my ribs. It's also important to do test fits if you can throughout your build to make sure that everything is going together properly. For example, when I test fit this after putting the booby cups on, I actually noticed that there's some adjustments that need to be made. And now, more trim! Same thing as the gauntlets. I'm using the half round dowels, and I simply eyeball the length of them and then cut them and glue them into place and make sure I'm cutting them at angles so that each piece goes together properly. I hardly ever actually measure or do any math in my costumes. I know you're supposed to, especially with like seam allowance and stuff, but like, I don't fucking like math. Math sucks. Fuck that. Just a lot of guesswork, and it usually works out. Usually. I really like that there's a piece of this trim that goes right through the middle of this booby cup, and it hides that seam that I glued them together with earlier, and it's like a little bit of reinforcement too. I also used the Barge contact cement to attach this little piss ball right to the middle, and I also used like a little extra strap of fabric as like a stabilizing attachment because the edge of the ball is so freaking thin that as many places I can get attachment would be better. And then to make the shoulder strap armor, I repeat the cling wrap and duct tape method to make the pattern. Made sure to put my hair in a wig cap so I didn't get it stuck in duct tape because I've done that before and that shit hurts. And then once the duct tape is off my body, I clean up the sketch and transfer it to paper for the pattern. The foam I'm using for this piece is thinner than the breastplate. It is 2mm EVA foam because I want it to be light and thin on this part of my body. If it's thicker, then it'd be really tough to move my arms and head around. After cutting out my pieces, I make sure that the pattern pieces are in the right spot before starting to use barge to glue them together. I have glued pieces together in the wrong spot before, and that sucks. Each side comes in 4 pieces. There's a shoulder front and back, and then a neck front and back, and then those go together. And I once again will use my heat gun to help shape it, so that when it's worn, it curves around my shoulder and sits nicely against my body. And then once again, cover that shit in dowels. Nice little trim. Every single piece of this armor is gonna get covered in these dowels. The design also includes a gold choker with a gem in it, and instead of making a duct tape pattern, I simply measure around my neck, since the pattern will just be a straight piece and attaches on either side in a circle. This is made with the thinnest foam I have to make sure it's lightweight and easy to wear around my neck. The design shows a trim just like most of the armor, and I'm cutting it out of that thin 2mm foam. Just super thin strips of it. And the gem gets glued into the middle, and the neck gets some trim around it as well. The design also includes a fabric piece that hangs from the front of the breastplate and goes around the arm to the back. And I use my finished breastplate to make this pattern. It gets like a little front piece that hangs in the front and a little back piece that will be glued to the inside of the breastplate. I also use this pattern to start tracing the little the little armor piece that gets attached later. I trace these patterns right onto my blue sparkly fabric and cut those out. And then I also use the pink sparkly fabric in order to make a trim around the front part of this fabric piece. And then the front and back pieces of this blue fabric get pinned and sewn together so that when it's flipped inside out, it looks like it hangs over the front of my breastplate. And then with that pattern I made earlier, I trace these onto foam, cut them out, and glue them together in order to make those little foam bits that get glued right there to the front. They won't get glued until after they're fully painted though. And then once again I'm going to use some foam clay to add those little 3D raised details onto the piece. It just needs water to attach, and it's super simple to shape. Now I'm going to add the last upper body piece with these pauldrons. Another rather complicated shape, however I already have a pattern for this. I bought these from Kamui Cosplay, who's a fucking goddess, a long time ago, and they're actually really useful for all sorts of armor builds. I'm simply cutting out the printed pattern and then slightly adjusting it to match my reference image. And then these new patterns get moved onto my 4mm EVA foam and once again get glued together with my contact cement. And thanks to Kamui Cosplay's patterns, I know these seams will attach to make a nice rounded shape. I just need to hit them with the heat gun and roll them around, and they're nearly there. And of course, just like every other armor piece in this build, they're going to need the round trim that goes all the way around them. I eyeball it, I cut it, and I glue it. The very last step for these pauldrons is going to be to add those extra raised details around the edges. I mark where they go with a Sharpie following the reference, and I use more foam clay to add these. This stuff is a lifesaver. It's so easy to use, so easy to apply. It's extremely lightweight. You only need your fingers in order to shape and smooth out the design. It's also pretty affordable. And here they are, some junket pauldrons for my shoulders. Moving on to the lower body, it's time to make these hip pieces, which I just learned were called folds. It's a little armor skirt that's called a fold. The more you know. For some reason I forgo the saran wrap and just put this duct tape directly on my body, and I don't recommend this. But it worked, I guess. I make the pattern out of paper and put it right onto my EVA foam. I am also cutting out circles from 2mm EVA foam for the gems to be glued to, so that I can more easily add the foam dowel trims that go around them. They get attached with my trusty barge, and the dowels wrap right around the gems that get glued down to the 2mm EVA foam base. This is basically just for stability. And then these wrapped up little gems get glued right to the hip pieces. I think there's supposed to be some gems in the front and the back, but I ended up not ordering enough of them, so they're on the front now only. Sorry, not sorry. By the way, these resin gems are from Element of Supplies on Etsy. I highly recommend their shop if you don't feel like casting your own resin gems. They have so many shapes and colors, and I'm not confident in my resin skills at all, so this was a blessing. And yeah, more trim. After the smaller hip pieces are finished, I'm using them as a guide to make the pattern for the folds, the big gold pieces that go on each side. I'm totally freehanding this sketch, and I'm really surprised that it turned out the right size on the first try. I wish I had a trick to share with you, but this just happens after you make armor for way too many years. I also made a second piece to see if I like the way they fit together, and yep, looks good. Time to make it out of EVA foam. You know how it goes by now: foam, dowels, trim, glue. Once again, these pieces have little raised details around the edges that kind of look like little spikes, so I'm adding that with more foam clay. And done! One more bit of sewing that I can't forget about are the pink skirts on either hip. The pattern for these is just a big rectangle. Puppy! Puppy, give me a puppy, puppy, puppy! Okay, anyway. The rectangle's fabric get hemmed and cleaned up, and then I bunch them up on one side to make a pleated skirt look. And sew that down. They also have these small detail pieces in the corner of each skirt, and I make sure to trace the corner to get the right size and make them out of thin, lightweight EVA foam, 2mm again. And that way, once it's glued down, it'll still have some foosh and airiness to the skirt and won't be weighed down super heavily. These won't get attached until they're fully primed and painted. And then the last step is to simply attach these two separate pieces together, and the skirt will get attached as well once everything is painted. It's finally hat time! The most iconic piece of Dark Magician Girl is her hat, and I'm so pleased with how Fonte art kept the silhouette and vibes, and it still is updated to match the rest of the redesign. And this is another piece that I already had a pattern for. I'm using the witch hat pattern from Kinpatsu Cosplay, but I am turning the back of the hat upside down and getting rid of the brim. I simply follow the hat pattern by tracing it onto EVA foam, cutting it out, and gluing it together through registration marks using my contact cement. Pieces this big are often really difficult to glue together. You kind of have to squeeze it from either side and pinch and push the edges to make sure the registration marks match up. However, I accidentally printed this hat at 120%, which means it is way too big for my gosh darn head. What the heck? So I simply cut into the finished hat and took out pieces to make it smaller. And there we go! It's still real big, but it's not overtaking my entire noggin. It is a little bit long though, so I did end up shortening the hat by removing a couple inches from the rim. And then with paper wrapped around the base, I start sketching out the additional pieces that layer on top of the hat, kind of like those visors in medieval helmets. This shape I traced ended up being the wrong shape. The seam where they connect made the incorrect silhouette, like it made an outward facing silhouette when I wanted more of an inward swoosh kind of thing. And I didn't figure this out until I had already cut out the pattern pieces in EVA foam and I glued them all together, and that's when I realized the shape bent kind of in the wrong direction instead of whooshing upwards. I did try a couple of different methods to fix it, like cutting the seam and reheating it, but I ended up just completely redrawing the pattern shape and made that whooshy silhouette by entirely redoing the piece. And the main part of the hat also has the EVA foam dowels glued to it. It's not exactly trim, but there are some interesting raised details that go around the main body of the hat. And then the raised details that look like little spikes are also on the hat. These are already marked in Sharpie, and they're once again made with foam clay and water. I blend them right into the foam dowels with my fingers. And then that visor that I've real struggled with, that also gets some dowel trim, just like the rest of it. Are you surprised? No, me neither. I heat it up to make sure it keeps this nice round shape, give it a little bend, and I start adding some foam clay details onto this little visor as well. I promise that's water and not beer. Now I begin patterning the wings that go on either side of the hat. This pattern is just totally freehand sketched and then is traced onto 4mm EVA foam. I ended up heating up these before they're finished so that they're lying flat while I'm working on those trim details. The big swirl is also made with those foam dowels, and then to finish these wings after adding the foam dowel trims and the swirl, I add foam clay to make that little raised shape at the end that matches the reference. The last piece of this giant hat is one more visor. It adds one more layer of dimension, so I begin patterning this on a piece of paper, making sure to hold it up to the hat to make sure I like the size and shape of it. I decided I kind of didn't like the shape at this point, so I cut it right down the middle to make a new seam. And this little inverted round line will make the seam of it bent to make another fooshy silhouette, similar to the other visor, because I learned from my mistakes. I'm double checking that I like the shape and size of this piece before I move on to adding more of that half circle dowel trim. The detail on this part of the hat is a little bit bigger than the other pieces. I mark it with the Sharpie and then begin building up with more foam clay and water. The only real downside of this material is that it can take a while to dry if you make big pieces with it. Otherwise, it's super affordable and super easy to work with. You can find it everywhere now. I already mentioned T&D Cosplay Supply. I believe they have it to where I bulk order most of my foam, but it's also on Amazon and in a lot of craft stores as well. Once all the foam is dry, I can start attaching the pieces of the hat together, so the two visors and the main body of the hat and those wings. I have to make sure that the foam is dry first so that I don't accidentally stick a fingernail in it or smoosh it and mess up the shape. Before I glue down the final pieces, the second visor and the wings, I mock up where I want them to go with duct tape first, and then I try it on in the mirror. I have to make sure that once this hat is sitting on my head, that I still have some peripheral vision while I'm walking around a convention center. I like the placement, so I start marking where they go and attaching them with contact cement. Test fit! Look how fucking big it is! It's big! Oh, I like it, big hat! Oh, I like my hat. I don't know where I'm gonna store this when I'm all done. So, now that all of the armor is finished and we can move on to the magic wand. Such a cute design. I already measured the length of this 1-inch PVC pipe to how long I want it, so now I am tracing the ends onto paper so I can draw on the attachments, knowing the size of the pole. The first circle I used was too small, so I upgraded to another random circle I had lying around for the main head of the wand. In order to make this wand light up yellow, I'm tracing the pattern of the head onto a clear yellow folder. You can actually get these in big packs at Walmart or at the dollar store, and I think it's such a great hack to make in color and see-through pieces for your cosplay instead of dyeing expensive clear Warbler. Putting lights right behind this yellow plastic folder will look awkward by itself though. You'll be able to see each pinpoint of light, so it's important to diffuse the light. There are lots of options for this, but I'm using a special type of EVA foam called Plastizote, and it's a leftover piece from an old costume that I finished a while ago. And it is ordered from Lumen's Workshop. I glue the fairy lights in between the two pieces of Plastizote like a sandwich, and then it gets turned into its own sandwich with the yellow plastic on the outside. And then when doing projects that have small light effects, I always recommend these pre-made string lights with tiny battery packs. It's way easier than soldering your own lights. And I'm way too stupid for that! The lights are only supposed to shine through the little swirly valley, so we gotta add another layer of regular EVA foam on top of that. I'm using the same pattern as before, trace onto the foam and cut it out, but the swirls are too fine to cut out with scissors, so I'm hacking away at it with an old X-Acto blade. This cut ended up being super rough and jagged, and I had a ton of little bits and pieces of foam hanging everywhere. It was not cute. So once the swirly channel was cut out, I went at it with my Dremel to clean up the cut. Now I am flattening the very end of the PVC pipe by heating it up slowly and pressing down on it with anything flat I have around me. Make sure you wear a mask when doing this. PVC pipe fumes are dangerous! But I couldn't actually flatten it with my upper body. I had to stand on it instead. And then this flat piece gets glued into the main head of the wand, covered by the EVA foam swirls. Look at that! The lights are so cute already! This is just measuring and cutting out additional foam slices to wrap around the PVC pipe, or like discs that go up the pipe and get glued into place. I'm also using more of my trusty foam dowels to add more detail. There's also a long ribbon that is wrapped around, but is like floating down from the head of the wand. I did consider making this out of fabric, but then it would just hang flatly down due to, gravity, instead of having a nice bounce to it. And I wasn't gonna be like twirling it around for every picture. So I wanted it to lay in that nice, like, floaty, swirly thing naturally. So instead of fabric, I made it out of EVA foam, the thin 2mm foam, and I didn't really trust that this foam would actually, like, sit like that even after heating it up and shaping it. So I hid some wire in the edges, and it's hiding under this thin trim that goes down the edges of each side of the foam. This wire will help it stay in that nice little swirly position floating around the wand. And I'll even be able to continue to pose it after it's painted, which is really nice. Once the ribbon is finished, I use my contact cement to attach it to the wand and start shaping it with the help of the wire that's already been glued into it, and it remains free and bouncy. The details at the bottom are added with the same technique. My pattern is traced on the paper and measured to be able to wrap around the wand. Each piece gets attached with contact cement. And then the smaller round pieces at the very bottom of the wand are made from multiple circles of thick 10mm foam. And those are glued together, and I've cut out a channel of them, and they slide right over the end of the PVC pipe. I'm also taking the time to hide the edges of the head of the wand because the plastic and Plastidot little sandwich that is there is still visible. I'm covering it all up with more foam clay and making sure it's a nice round closure, like a lollipop. Okay, sorry. You can't forget to leave enough space to reach the light switch though, because I want to make sure all that effort doesn't go to waste. Also use the same technique at the very bottom of the wand to make it look nice and round. In the past, I would have made a cover out of like EVA foam and then used a Dremel to make it into that nice round shape. Been having so much fun with foam clay. Now the wand just needs its wings. I'm once again making a little foam sandwich with the larger pattern pieces on the outside and then these small little feathers on the inside. I'm also making sure to taper the edges of these feathers so that they look softer instead of having a flat edge from the first scissor cut. Everything gets put together with more contact cement, and the second piece of sandwich wing just gets added right on top. I also noticed that I forgot to add this little piece here at the bottom of the wand, so I'm quickly making a pattern, cutting some pieces out of foam and gluing that right on before I forget. I also have to make sure that the foam clay is dry before I attach any of these so I don't mess it up. And then the wings are finished and they get attached to the head of the wand with some barge. And the wand's done! Look how cute she is! Look at that little ribbon! Oh god, my face looks so bored! Oh my god, I'm so dead inside from crafting all day. I promise I'm excited. I'm really close to finishing this. Just kidding, I'm not almost done. I have to style the fucking wig. And not gonna lie, this is always my least favorite part of any new cosplay. I suck at styling wigs, it's so frustrating, it never turns out good. And look at this mess I'm starting with. What happened to you? Poor baby. Anyway, I'm gonna try my best to detangle it with some kids detangling spray that I just showed. I have to douse the whole mess in this spray and start brushing it through the strands. It's so badly tangled, it needs a lot of work, so this took some time. But at least now she looks, a little okay. And then next I actually steam the wig because I need to take out the styling that was already there and it gives me a blank slate to work with. Because once she's been steamed, I get to break out the crimper and I get to crimp the fuck out of this wig. This technique for making a fluffy wig is brand new to me. I've never really tried to crimp a wig before, but I did watch a lot of videos on it, so I guess I'm a fucking expert now. What I understand is that this kind of melts and fluffs up the fibers into a big fluffy mess, and then you just tease it out, so that's what I did. Small section by small section, over and over again, I crimped the shit out of this wig. It took hours because this thing is long. I I really didn't think I'd be able to save this wig. I thought I'm gonna have to buy something new, spend a bunch of money on a big fluffy wig, but fuck it, I've already have this perfect blonde one right here, so I might as well try to make it work, right? And even if I fail, at least I'll have some experience on how not to crimp a wig. And now once she looks like sad pasta all over, I get to brush her all out again. Tease, 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 brush, 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 tease, 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 brush, brush, brush. And this was satisfying. Oh my gosh, it's so fluffy. From a sad little tangled mess to this big floofy goddess. So much fluff. But of course she's not done yet. She needs some anime-ass hair spikes. And this truly is the part that always gets me frustrated. I could never seem to get how hair spikes really work in wigs. I could see how other people did them, and then every time I attempted it, it would just look so wet and awkward. However, the crimping, the fluff, really truly helped. It felt like I had so much more to work with, and I could really make spikes that I actually liked the look of. They held their shape with got-to-be-glued hairspray, and with a little bit of heat, they actually looked airy and floofy. Even though I didn't get all the crimp marks out of the wig, I'm still really happy with how this turned out. It's like a switch flipped in my head, and now I understand what's so fun about wig styling. It still looks a lot better further away than close up, but like, fuck it, right? I'm still happy. This looks better than any wig I've ever made before. Look at them bangs. Look how fluffy and spiky those bangs are. Oh my god, so fantastic. And now I get to move on to the ends of the hair, because there are also these big swooshy spikes at the very bottom, and they floof up on either side of her head, so I hold them in place while hitting them with more heat and more hairspray. Don't go near me with an open flame, because this wig will catch up and burn in seconds. I think in total, this wig took about 6 hours of work. Definitely the most time I've ever put into a wig as well. Oh my god. Look at the difference that crimping and styling and fluffing this wig has made. Do you remember what it looked like before? Holy fuck. Look at it! Fluffy and swooshy! I'm so proud of her! Look at me! Eee! Oh my god, I had so much fun wearing this. Okay, now we can paint. But first things first, everything needs hearty coats of Plastidip, at least 3 coats. This stuff is my favorite primer. It's fast, and it's easy to use, and it's pretty cheap. I don't like the look of paint streaks from primers like wood glue because I don't have the patience to sand it down. So this stuff is perfect for me. Even though it's fast, this process still took quite a long time. Every coat needs 30 minutes in between. Each piece is getting 3 coats, but usually more. And then once it's all primed, it needs another 4 hours to totally cure. Don't forget to wear gloves and face protection when priming, by the way. A full respirator is recommended. Everything looks nice and primed, so time to move on to the spray paint. I don't really have a lot of room to do this. As you can see, I'm just out on my tiny balcony with a big paint tarp. But maybe one day I'll have a yard and won't have to worry about destroying the apartment complex's property. Don't tell them I'm doing that. Same deal with this, make sure you're wearing protection and give your pieces at least 3 coats. I picked this light blue for all of my armor. However, I did end up running into a problem when I was painting. I had the unfortunate side effect of the red Sharpie showing through when I was tracing my patterns and marking my pieces. It's like 6 coats of primer and paint. You can still see this red Sharpie. It's so frustrating. I was so defeated at this point. I didn't know what to do except try more coats. And there were also loads of air bubbles in my paint job. This sucked. It was so demotivating. But I really had no choice but to keep going at this point. The extra coats did end up helping, by the way. I don't think you could see the red Sharpie in the final build. But now that all the spray paint is done, get to work on the pieces that are hand painted. So that is the gold and the pink trim. I make sure to water it down to lessen the amount of streaks. And this took many, 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 many coats. The hip pieces, the neck pieces, the armbands that go right above the gloves, any of the trim around the gems get some gold. And there's a puppy! I got visited by my puppy! Okay, Sorry. Another bummer side effect of my spray paint job is that a lot of the pieces have this awkward texture on them, and I don't know how that happened. But other pieces are perfectly smooth. You can really see the difference in the shine and quality. But at this point, I wasn't about to remake entire pieces of armor, so I just had to deal with it. And it's time for the pink paint. Oh damn, look at my absolutely stacked hot chocolate. I think it was Christmas time. How cozy. Okay, so this is another process that took a lot of patience and lots of coats of paint. The pink shimmer gloss went on so thin, so I had to be pretty precise with it, and it took a lot of time. Even in this video, you can kind of barely see the pink paint on top of the blue, so you know it took a lot of coats for it to finally show through. And I'm just painted trim after trim after trim, and more trim. And trim, and some more trim, and some stripes. And some trim. But after a couple coats, it's starting to look a little bit more vibrant. You can kind of see the pink shining through now. I think it's maybe 3 coats, and I probably applied another 3 on the entire armor. But the gold, look at how streaky that gold is. I really tried to paint it without the streaks, but damn, it really wasn't working with me, huh? However, I did remember that I have this amazing product. It's called Rub and Buff, and it's left over from my previous cosplay build. And this stuff is amazing for making your metallic armor really shine. And you don't paint it on, you rub it on, just like the branding says. I dab a teeny bit onto the paper towel and just rub. And you can already see the difference. Look at that streaky paint side versus the Rub and Buff side. Time for more detail paint. Like the orb on the center of the titty plate. Ponder the orb. Mini orb. Oh, and of course more trim. And of course the wand gets a nice coat of gold at the top and bottom. And I rub and buff the wand as well so that the gold streaks aren't shining through. Then, once I'm happy with the paint job, I can finally reveal the pretty shining red gems that have been hiding underneath masking tape. I made sure to mask all the gems before I painted, so I didn't accidentally cover them up, and it's such a satisfying moment to let them pop through. I also freehand painted the star onto the booby orb, which didn't turn out the greatest. Didn't turn out super great. Pretty lopsided little star, so next time I will probably use a stencil. The ribbon gets painted to match the same color as the spray paint, and it also gets its own pink trim. And then with that, the painting is done. We get to move on to the final touches and then figuring out how to attach them to my body. The wand gets to go first because it's the easiest. With the paint job all finished, the only step is to wrap the pole in some of this sparkly blue fabric. It's as simple as hot gluing it onto the top and then wrapping it around all the way to the bottom, with some glue along the way to make sure it stays in place. And then I fill in some last little pieces at the very bottom, and the wand is done! All of my other attachments are added with a mix of hot glue and E6000. These small pieces are attached with E6000, which is super strong. These are never popping off. And then the skirt is attached to the hip armor just with plain old hot glue. And then with the E6000 already out, I'm attaching the small pieces onto the fabric that falls down from the breastplate, and I'm using a tip of an old paintbrush to spread this glue on because you do not want it on your fingertips. And the hand armor also gets glued directly onto the glove. I do this while I'm wearing it to make sure the placement is correct. And then these are the gold armbands that go on just on top of the glove that I forgot to record the process of making somehow. But these just get their ends glued together and then they slide right up my arm. The gold choker gets some Velcro on its ends for easy to wear and easy removal. And then these simply get attached with hot glue. I burnt the shit out of my fingers with all this hot glue, by the way. I'm also using hot glue to attach the fabric to the top of the breastplate. However, this first placement ended up kind of being wrong, and I ended up tearing it all off and doing it again. But luckily that's pretty easy to do with hot glue. The gauntlets will slide right over my arm and then be velcroed down with these straps. And these straps already have some Velcro sewn onto them. And then the matching Velcro gets glued to the inside of the other side of the gauntlet. Doing a quick test wear to make sure I like it, and it fits pretty good. Onto the boots! As mentioned before, I'm going to be attaching these boots and socks directly to a pair of tights. So it's basically like pants, and I don't have to keep tugging up the boots while walking around. So I start by pinning them to the tights that I am currently wearing. And yes, this is scary, and yes, I poked holes in my little body while doing this. But it must be done, so that when it gets sewn together, the tights and the boots are stretched out to the same place. This is awkward, and it's hard, and my face was upside down for way too long, and I definitely lost some brain cells. I also ended up sewing this onto me while I was wearing it, because the first time I took them off and ran it through my sewing machine. So when I tried to put it on, it no longer fit, and I had to unstitch the whole thing and redo the pins, and that's why I'm sitting here with my leggy up on the table sewing boots to myself. You'll also notice that there's a gem glued to my ankle, which I did off camera, because this is the same process you've already seen. E6000, slap that shit on, bam, it's glued down. And then before I forget to take my boots off, I also glued down the knee pads with some E6000. This stuff's so strong, it works great attaching foam to fabric. And then the very bottom of my feet get some rubber, because you need some grip when you're walking around. This shiny blue fabric is not good for walking around in. Just in my office, I would slip and fall. Look how good. It's a little wrinkly, but puppy! It's a little wrinkly, but still good. Look at the puppy. The giant hat doesn't sit on my head very well at this point, so I'm taking a plain headband and heating it up so it can be bent to be a little wider. This way it'll fit over my noggin and the wig without squeezing my brains. There's some little teeth built into this headband and make sure that the hat sticks to my head all day. It fell off once or twice during the convention, but it was pretty sturdy. And it gets attached with a buttload of contact cement and a buttload of glue for extra stability. Yee, there it is, sitting on my head. Look how happy I am with this little hat. Sticking on my head is so cute and so big. Puppy! The last set of attachments that I need to work on are the boobie and the shoulder bits. I take some time to make sure I'm familiar with where I want the breastplate to sit on my body. I hold up the fabric bits so I like where they're sitting, and I do the same with the shoulder pieces. And I mark directly onto the bodysuit where the edge of each piece is, and I do this with the bright silver Sharpie. And this is the part where I rip off the old fabric where I glued it. Before, it was hanging a little bit too far outwards and it would have gotten in the way of the pauldron. So I trimmed it, brought it close to the center, and re-glued it. All of the body armor will be attached directly to the bodysuit with Velcro. The first step is to add the Velcro on key pieces of the breastplate, like the center, top of the boobie cups, the bottom, and the very sides. These are places where it's most likely for it to like pop up and look a little awkward, so I want to keep this armor as close to my body as possible, so it makes a nice silhouette. And then once I'm happy with where I'm putting them, they get attached with hot glue again! Boatloads of hot glue. And I do the same thing with the shoulder armor, one piece in the front and the back in the middle, and then again on the hip armor. I'm super comfortable using Velcro to attach these pieces because all of the armor is very, very lightweight. It wouldn't be possible with a material like Warbler, but since everything's made out of EVA foam, it works great. It stays all day. It's super easy to remove and super easy to attach. Once all of the Velcro is on the armor pieces, I need to work on matching it up to the right spots on the bodysuit and then sewing the matching Velcro onto those spots. Once again, I make marks with a bright silver Sharpie simply by lifting and pressing over and over again where the armor is going to be pressed to my body. I have to be careful to make sure to mark only the places where it's going to be covered by the armor, so I don't have giant Sharpie stains on my bodysuit, which I think I do. With my Sharpie mark guides, I can now attach the matching Velcro with pins, and I can start sewing it down with my sewing machine. The very last attachments I need to work on are the fabric bits that hang off the breastplate and the shoulder pauldrons. Making attachments into snaps instead of Velcro, and they get sewn on right by hand. Finally, the pauldrons, which are also a Velcro attachment. And then once this final bit is sewn, Dark Magician Girl is finally done.
Thank my pal Armando for getting me that really lovely footage of my finished cosplay at Anime Los Angeles a while back. You can find him at the LA Explorer on YouTube and Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. Also, big thanks to you for making it this far. As mentioned, this is my very first crafting video, so I'm sure it's not perfect. I'd love to hear your constructive criticism in the comments, if you have any, for how to improve in the future, because I did have a lot of fun filming and editing this, and I'd like to do it again. If for some reason this is the first thing you've ever seen me in, hi! Welcome! I'm really happy to have you here. You can find me on social media at Katie Simrel, and if you really like my cosplay and you want to throw some hot dollars at me, you can support me on Patreon, where my patrons get to pick my costumes and see all the photos from the photo shoots, stuff like that. Also, if you do not give a fuck about the cosplay and just want to see some other stuff, I have a secret spicy air blowing website too. If you know, you know. Now, I have to go pet my dog. Bye! But her outfit isn't very flattering, at least on me, and boy, did you have to close the door that loud.